Hey, son. So you're turning 13, becoming a man. Your hormones are surging, starting to notice the girls. You know, maybe your body's doing some funny things. Oh, you want to talk? Or we could talk about drugs.
Yeah, let's talk about drugs.
There's no wrong way to talk to your kids about drugs. Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
Okay, so both conversations have to take place. We're not going to be able to help you with the sex talk, right? But we do hope you walk away with some strategies that are helpful. This is the most recent Modern the Future study, and noting where we are on the 8th, 10th, and 12th grade level on a national basis. So we have alcohol still our primary drug of choice, and that number has remained primarily stable for the most part. But kids are doing less binge drinking, and more kids are getting comfortable going throughout their high school career not using alcohol. So that's a norm, but clearly more work to do, okay? Give me $10,000 to spend on marijuana with Joanne and Chief Owens and your school. Well, let's look at the numbers, right? 8th grade at 11%, 10th grade at 28%, and 12th grade at 35%. So if we were going to spend $10,000 on marijuana, I would not be spending that money on 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I'd be spending all my money on 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, right? You see the number goes up from 28% to 35%, a 7% increase, but a 17% increase between 8th grade and 10th grade. So if we're bringing marijuana into the discussion in junior year as a parent, for many kids, that's too late. And then in regard to vaping, right? So we've at least sort of stabilized these numbers. These numbers were skyrocketing over the past couple of years. And now we in the prevention field, our schools, we're getting a better handle on things, and we're getting a good prevention message out. But still, the vaping of nicotine, the vaping of marijuana is a serious issue that needs to be dealt with, okay? On the middle school level, so this is New Jersey data. So the alcohol is still our primary drug of choice, marijuana and tobacco to follow. Just getting the message across, again, having the conversation early is an important part of what we need to be doing. This is data from the Attorney General's office, and noting where we are on the opioid issue. So you look at 2014, the overdose deaths that we had rising all the way over to 3,000 in 2018. And then in 2019, we at least stabilized again, right? And 2020, right around 3,000. But looking at a good prevention message that we got across, that convincing parents that kids did not need an opioid, doctors providing alternative medications. So the opioids dispensed in 2014, right? 5.3, then up to 5.6. In New Jersey, we brought that number down significantly. One, by requiring parents to have for caregivers to have a conversation with doctors and dentists should an opioid be prescribed. And number two, as I said, getting the message out. And in New Jersey, there is a 5-day dosage. That's the initial way in which opioids were administered. Now there's legislation in Congress to make that a national standard. So that's an example of New Jersey leading the way. Pointing towards why kids use. So to feel good about themselves, to look cool. We in the prevention field have been saying that, and parents thinking that way, that is accurate. But recent years, we also have to look at stress. And stress, especially as related to COVID, that is an important piece of the puzzle. So one prevention strategy we need to put in place for parents is having parents talk to their kids and having their kids deal with stress in a healthy manner, as opposed to dealing with stress, anxiety, or depression by using alcohol or other drugs. Okay. This was our media campaign. We had out regarding the opioid issue. So opioid use before high school graduation, increasing the risk of misuse by 33%. And then also getting the word out to parents. We don't want dentists or other prescribers to be using an opioid to handle pain on the adolescent level, unless there's some severe issue that requires it. Okay. So these are some of the recent vaping products that are out there, right? So on the end now, you see the rechargeable e-cigarette, the one in the middle in gray and black, that was the Juul. That was very popular in 2017 and 2018. Now kids are moving into a disposable type of e-cigarette. And again, this is something we need to address. Right? So the Surgeon General, we had a 5-year increase of electronic cigarettes and vaping going on nationally.
No, I'm not in a meeting. I'm listening to the meeting.
And then just looking at reasons as to why kids may vape, right? So a kid with a natural tendency to experiment, to see what it looks like because it tastes good. So in New Jersey, we stopped the sales of flavored products with vaping. So mango or bubble gum, we were able to take that off the market. But in the middle, you see, to relax or relieve tension. That is part of why some kids are vaping. And just showing you some attire. So on the right are the backpacks where kids could buy the backpack and they can store their equipment. And then if you look at the sweatshirt of the young man on the left, it looks like an ordinary sweatshirt, but there you see the nozzle where you can inhale the vape. And all the equipment, right, your cartridge and everything is all inside the sweatshirt in a pocket. And that's an example of what the industry did, right? There are people looking to make money, making it tougher for parents and teachers and administrators to notice what is going on. So that is a part of our reality. And with the commercialization with marijuana, that is going to be a continued part of what we need to be looking at, okay? So symptoms of vaping, right? Coughing, shortness of breath, and chest pain. But we've heard from pediatricians, abdominal pain, diarrhea, and weight loss. Those are also possibilities to be looking for if your kid may be vaping. Some nicknames, right? So a throat hit or a kick, that refers to the tingling feeling in the back of the throat. The nickname for nicotine, Nick, so that the nicotine is the chemical component that gives the kid the buzz, much like a regular tobacco cigarette that has keep people addicted. A battery, they nickname a bat, and if they're greening, so if you hear that, that could mean they're throwing up after using marijuana. And then at the bottom of the screen, different types of terms for taking a puff, a dab, a ripski, a draw. So these are terms to be familiar with, okay? And now with the legalization of marijuana, right? The effect on school performance and life achievement, that has been out there for a long time, that regular users of marijuana do not reach their academic potential, they do not reach their potential career-wise, and this is something that we need to let kids know, right? So we're going to have a product that will be legal, that will be for sale. So we in the prevention, in the health field, we've got to treat this as a health issue and getting kids the information they need. Just letting parents know, right? So edibles will be part of what's on sale. So these look like ordinary candy, but in reality, these are marijuana products that are going to be for sale. So the packaging of marijuana is an issue, making them look like ordinary candy. And then letting people know that with marijuana, if they are going to use an edible, the high comes on at a much slower rate, because the product has to go through the digestive system. So individuals will be using an edible product thinking they're not getting a buzz. And then when they don't, they're going to have more of the product. and the high is going to be more potent and going to hit them on a deeper level. So those are concerns we have. Right? The effects: impaired memory, difficulties in problem solving, altered senses of mood and time, and change in mood or body movements. So I was glad to hear Joanne say that your kids had a discussion where the impact on the brain was shown to kids in your school. So that is what we need to get the word out. This is from the Surgeon General, so emphasizing the importance of protecting our nation from the health risks of marijuana and recent increases in marijuana and its potency. So now, because we've moved from a bong and a joint to a vaping product, well, now we've got a product that will be legal. We've got a device that gives a bigger, quicker hit. So we've got to get the ideas out, the misperceptions of safety in marijuana, that are the health of our kids is very much at risk. Okay. So Chief Owens might go into some detail. Hope he has a chance to speak, but when we come back to this issue, I certainly hope he can comment. So the recent law that has been put into effect, right? A juvenile 17 years of age, if they come into contact by police, a warning is issued, but there's no notification of a parent, okay? And then a second event, well, if the second event occurs, that's when both a written warning and police are allowed to notify parents. So letting you know that there are legislators in Trenton that are trying to address this issue, and feel comfortable that if you are of the view that this needs to be changed, right, you're going to alert your legislators, right? So, you know, we know we've had issues with marijuana in terms of having a negative impact on individuals in terms of a long arrest record. So there was a 19-year-old kid on the radio, and he was talking about, well, he had marijuana, was arrested, was in recovery, and then went to treatment. And then when he wanted to apply for financial aid, he was denied because of his arrest record. Well, right, we at the partnership, we want that kid to meet his or her true academic potential. But on the other end, allowing parents to be notified seems to make sense to us. Right? Some impact on COVID, right? So teens experience anxiety, stress, and depression. So this is part of what we have to deal with in terms of these young individuals who have been hit with the pandemic, okay? Underage drinking, that is part of what we have to address. And, you know, we've got to do it in different ways, right? So, and then just putting some strategies out there for parents and adult caregivers related to COVID, right? We want to be empathetic and listening and validating the impact. So if a kid is getting angry, if a kid feels depressed, if a child is crying, telling them not to feel that way is going to create more tension. So normalize the emotion, right? Recognize that they are okay to feel angry, to feel lonely, and then try and connect them with coping skills that could help them, right? And note, there are traumatic experiences that may trigger people, trigger various emotions. So again, instead of using alcohol or drugs, we want them to get professional help, okay? So things to warning signs: some slurred speech, skin abrasions, glassy or red eyes, itchy skin, all are behaviors, right? And then neglecting appearance, a change in mood, if they're fighting with friends or family, depression or loss of motivation, nodding off, if spoons are missing, a clear sign that heroin's being used, if the grades are slipping, if we're missing money or valuables, increased candle, incense, or air freshener are clear signs that marijuana may be used, and missing prescription medication. So that can be an issue. So again, an adolescent talked about alcohol not doing it for him, marijuana not doing it, but when he took his mom's Percocet, Wow. So, right, keeping an eye on your medication in your medicine cabinet, that's an important piece of prevention, right? And then just finishing up with some prevention and risk factors, right? If there's a history of substance use disorder in the family, if we can talk about kidney disease, if we can talk about cancer, if we can talk about heart disease, well, then we should be able to talk about substance abuse as a disease, okay? And then many of our individuals in recovery and treatment have both a mental health issue and a substance use disorder, okay? If parents aren't watching what goes on, that puts that kid at risk. And then here's where I think we in the prevention field and the health field, we are going to make a solid impact dealing with adverse childhood experiences. So a death of a family member, sexual abuse, a car accident, poverty, so a family experiencing homelessness. If a child has an adverse childhood experience, many of them are not only going to develop a health issue related to substance abuse or a mental health problem, their respiratory systems are impacted, their immunity systems are in. So we now have solid research on this, and now we're going to help kids cope with those ACEs. So that's where I think prevention will be going in the next few years. And a risk factor, right? Depression, anxiety, all those are realities, okay? Okay, so what we're trying to do, right? What the Alliance is trying to do, what your school is trying to do, to have your kids have a healthy self-concept. You want them to have good self-control. You want them to handle their coping skills for an adverse childhood experience. So handling anger, handling stress, handling something that comes their way. You want them hanging out with other peers who are also not involved with drugs and alcohol. And the good parent who's watching what's going on. That is good prevention, okay? If your child's attached to school, if bonded to school is part of their normal experience, that is good prevention. And then you want them involved in positive activities, whether it's athletics, arts, hobbies, in faith-based organizations, youth groups. Your structured program is in place. So I would argue in Cranberry, your schools are your best prevention program. Kids are in structured programs during the day. What parents need to do between 5th grade and 12th grade, well, what happens after school? What happens from 4 to 7 o'clock when mom and dad get home? What happens Friday and Saturday night when kids want to be out and they don't want to be with mom and dad? So you want structured program going on so they are engaged in activities that are healthy and watched, okay? So just a couple of conversation starters. Right? What are people saying about vaping? What are kids saying about the legalization of marijuana? And then a good prevention strategy. It doesn't sound like you're talking about drugs at all, right? What's the toughest thing you're going through these days, right? And helping your child get through that. That is good prevention, right? And then having meals. So if the family can have a meal and not only does the kid put the phone away, but mom and dad put the phone away, right? So you're connecting, you're bonding, and if grandma and grandpa are there, that's great, right? If the aunts are there, that's great, right? So we know with COVID, family bonding is especially important, but engaging with kids in a real way during the meal, that is good prevention. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, right? As I said, you want that conversation to start early at the age of 9. So that gives you a sense of what we are looking for. And in your own work, right? You're involved with your kids, you're building their self-esteem, you provide unconditional love. So if they make a mistake with drugs or alcohol, they're still cared for, they're still supported. Enforcing the family rules. So here's what it is, right? If you're a parent of a 7th grader and your kid knows, well, if I come home and I'm drunk or if I've used alcohol and I'm grounded for 3 weekends, well, mom and dad, you're grounded for 3 weekends, right? Make realistic rules and put them in place. And then the sad part is, and Chief Owens could probably concur, the parent who says, I really didn't think it could happen to my kid, right? We haven't got a handle on substance abuse to the point where no kid can definitely get through their adolescence without an issue. So thinking that way puts your kids at risk. And then you have good people in Cranberry that are qualified, that are trained, that if you have an issue that you think might be related to substance abuse, you make that pivot, you make that phone call, you connect and get experts involved in order to solve the problem. So I know I flew through this rather fast, but I do, as I said, wanted to respect the time that was out there. So I'll put my number and email in my chat. But Joanne, I'm going to end there because I really think you have other people that are qualified to speak, okay?
Yes, well, thank you so much, Bill. You really shared valuable information for us, a lot of great takeaways. Let's start talking to our kids at as early as the age of 9 or even earlier if they ask questions. Get involved. Make structured activities available for your kids. Have conversation starters. I like that one question that you shared. What is the toughest thing that you were going through? Sitting at the kitchen table, what was the best part of your day, the worst part of your day? That's something that we always used to do with our kids. So really observing our children and being involved in their lives. So thank you for sharing that valuable information. Really appreciate that. Great takeaways. I am going to share my screen and just show you a picture of our additional panelists. Bill is still going to join us as a panelist. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, so we have some expert panelists that I spoke about a little. I gave some information about our panelists a little earlier. We have Michael Owens, our police chief. We're very grateful to have him as the chief in our town, and he is on our Municipal Alliance doing a great job. We have Skip Bailey, who has a wealth of information to offer our panel. We have Robin Skeed, who lives right here in town, and she's a student and a parent, a community member. She's on the Municipal Alliance, and she is the CEO and founder of the Treehouse Community Project. And we have Dr. Ward, who is she's an assistant professor in the Center for Substance Abuse Research at Temple University, and she did a program for our 7th and 8th graders this week. So I'm going to come off of screen sharing, and I am going to ask our panelists, starting with Chief Owens, if each panelist can briefly say a little bit about themselves and just to tell us about your unique perspective on our panel.
Sure, it's good to see everyone. I enjoyed your presentation there, Bill. A lot of information. 22 years with Cranberry Township Police Department. Most of those years I was a DARE instructor at first, which was drug abuse resistance education. And that DARE program turned into a LEAD, which is law enforcement against drugs. So I did that most of my career. I've attended all their yearly conventions, so we picked up a lot of training there. I think most important with this conversation today, I have 2 teenage children. I have a 14-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter. So when we talk about, I think mainly the new marijuana laws that we're discussing today, they hit home, and certainly I'm just as concerned as any parent who might be in a room listening and wondering what to talk to their children about. I think the program that Bill just presented is fantastic. I wanted to point out that there is a lot of help in our community for those going through some issues. I do think the trend, as he explained, is going to go more towards not only prevention of drug use or alcohol abuse at first, but treatment of those who become addicted. Middlesex County has a program called Blue Cares. I'll give you that number. It's 596-4199. That's Blue Cares in Middlesex County. And that's a fantastic resource for those who are dealing with maybe drug issues or issues that they might, parents might need to find help for their children. So I do believe that that's the trend, for prevention and treatment of drugs. I know the enforcement end of the drugs, it seems like the latest law that the governor put out doesn't seem like the cop intervention is going to occur so much anymore. There's a lot of police could be charged if they take some missteps in dealing with juveniles with drugs or alcohol. So I think the police in general are going to probably be less enthusiastic to approach that kid who he might see walking with himself and potentially smoking a joint or carrying a beer in his hand, because we're not allowed to approach that kid anymore based upon the new law. Just on that alone, that's something that you see. So, the police are, I know that there's talks about changing that, and I hope that comes to fruition. But I know that in the past, a lot of times parents would get, a police officer would walk a kid home and knock on the door and say, "Hey, I caught your kid doing this or doing that." And a lot of times that was a wake-up call that parents kind of needed, and said, and say, we need to address something here. Our kid is, making some poor decisions. And I think we're going to lose a little bit of that. So I think programs like this about education, about making poor choices is probably our strongest and best bet. And I thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ward, if you can share with us a little bit about your perspective and also what you discussed with the students this week, that would be wonderful.
Sure. First, I want to say that was just a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much. And it makes me so happy to see that towns and communities and schools have programs like this available to them. That was just fantastic. So I have my PhD in neuroscience. I went to graduate school from 2000 to 2004 at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. And my research was in substance abuse effects on the brain. I don't study people, I study rats and mice, studying sort of the basic neurobiology of drugs of abuse and how drugs change the brain in ways that can change behavior and lead to abuse and addiction. The reason why I went into that area is that I was interested in helping to destigmatize mental illness and to destigmatize substance abuse. And what you said, Bill, was, really touched a chord with me, that we need to start looking at these things as diseases. And hopefully that makes it easier for people to talk about these subjects with their families, with their children, be honest about substance abuse that may be present or has been present in their families. I think that is so important. And so at the time when I was in graduate school, one thing I started doing on the side is going to schools and talking to kids about research. It actually started by talking to kids about using animals in research, because that's a topic that kids especially, are very passionate about. And so when I spoke to kids about using animals in research and studying the brain, has developed over 20 years now of using it more as an opportunity to talk about drug abuse with kids. I now have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and it is so important to have these conversations, to start really young, to be very honest and truthful with kids. Kids can smell a lie a mile away, and kids are not going to be honest with you if you don't think that you're being honest with them. And I always say there's enough bad things about drugs and the way they affect the brain that we don't need to make anything up. So I think, we have the power of science and the facts, some of which Bill laid out beautifully, to really, be objective about it and teach kids the statistics out there. The other hat I wear as a researcher is that I study medical cannabis. So this is a really interesting space for me. So I've spent 20 years talking to kids about drug abuse, and I've spent the last 10 years talking to grown-ups, doctors and patients and the lay community about the potential therapeutic effects of cannabis. I was honored to be able to talk to the students on Monday and Tuesday about this. And one thing I would share is, some people find this new topic daunting. Well, now if cannabis is legal in my state, not only for recreational, but as a medicine, this is very confusing, and how can I ever talk to my kids about it? But we're surrounded by this in our communities, right? People abuse prescription opioids. It's one of the biggest problems we have right now. So we have to understand how to have that conversation about the safe use of medication versus the abuse of medication. ADHD medication is one of the most commonly abused drugs amongst teenagers. And then with legal recreational, we have alcohol. I think we do such a terrible job of presenting the harms of alcohol to our children. We glorify alcohol in our society. So another thing I would say about talking to your kids about cannabis and watching your conversations about cannabis is making sure you're not stigmatizing drug abuse, but make sure you're not glorifying recreational drug abuse at the same time. And I know that sounds like a lot of things, to keep straight in our heads, but those are just some of my thoughts, thinking about this topic and talking to the students. And I'm happy to be a resource to anybody who has more medical or scientific questions about cannabis or about drug abuse in general. And so, like Bill, I'll put my email address in the chat, and I'm just so happy to be a part of this and to hear what wonderful things you all are doing.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Ward. And if I can ask Chief Owens, if you can put the telephone number for Blue Cares in the chat as well. And just a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat box. And after all of our panelists present, we can go to our questions. So I'd like to introduce Skip to share his unique perspective on our panel this evening. Thank you, Skip.
Yes, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, thanks again for asking me to be a part of this. And Bill, the presentation was great. A lot of the things that you were presenting, some of the things that were disturbing to me, even the little candy bar, fake things like that. But my background, I'm a certified author, life coach, speaker, and trainer with the John C. Maxwell Group. I'm a certified drug and alcohol recovery coach, certified and also author of 3 books. And I've also attended the Landmark Worldwide Forum, which is a forum worldwide, which helps people to really dig down with themselves to understand the things that they may not understand what's really going on with themselves. Background, also coaching adults in the past. Even though with the addiction recovery, dealing with adults in the past, a lot of adults who are already smoking marijuana, drugs, or whatever, really don't want to address their issues. So then I really started focusing on teens, youth, and I'm glad I'm a part of this forum and this panel, because in the future, especially with the legalization of marijuana, the marijuana that they can purchase from the dispensaries or whatever, it's not some of the same stuff that's sold on the streets, which if the stuff that's purchased in the dispensaries, the kids find out it's not strong enough or it isn't getting them high as they want, the stuff that they sell on the streets is worse. So one of the couple of things that I want to focus on, that I do focus on, is prevention. Helping the parents to learn how to communicate and connect. Like Bill said, connect with the kids. You can communicate with them, but if you're not connecting with them, that's a whole different story. And to also become a good listener. Become a very, very good listener, because I don't know if Dr. Ward said, or someone, or the chief said earlier, if kids feel that you're not being honest with, I think you said that, Dr. Ward. If the kids feel that you're not being transparent and being honest with them, they'll tune you out instantly. You're tuned out. A couple of other things is, like I said, becoming a good listener. One of the focus points I'm doing is helping children to understand, helping the parents to help the children to understand that they do understand some of the peer pressure that they're going through or may be going through, because we were once kids ourselves, you know, and went through some of the same things, which I talked to my adult kids about that, reference to my past drug addiction. And when I first did that with them last year, my youngest son is 26, and I told him about my they've heard about it, but they don't really didn't know the real story until I told them about it. And they sat there like they were in awe that, you know, I was open and transparent to tell them about my past.
现在新的那个你最新的这个叫什
Oh,
么
if we can all mute.
过了
Is
吧？
there, mute all.
怎么
All right, can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Being transparent with the kids, the teens between the the ages 7 to 14, 15 years old, and I do believe I think I smoked my first joint when I was in the 7th or 8th grade. Leading to other things, and as I had mentioned on the promo that we did, my drug of choice, which I was addicted to in the past years, it was cocaine and crack cocaine, and I used that to cover up the hurt and pain that I was feeling from the things that I didn't accomplish as a musician. And that's one of the things that we need to understand with our kids, talking and listening to them, some of the things that they may want to experiment with, the vaping or the marijuana or whatever pills, to cover up some of the issue that they may have. Because from going to the landmark forum that I attended a couple of years ago, it helped me to understand that it's okay to express myself even as an adult, because I realized that some of the hurt and pain that I was carrying around with me as an adult the last 10 years ago from childhood, I was still carrying those hurt and issues around as childhood issues. One of the issues I had was I used to wet the bed as a kid. I used to be a bedwetter, and I didn't really stop wetting the bed until I was like in junior high school. And I didn't realize I was carrying that hurt and pain around with me all of those years. So our kids could be carrying around issues that we aren't even aware of. So even with that, and one of the main things I want to close with, helping the parents to understand, to learn how to be a big influencer in their kids. They should be, I believe that the parents should be one of the biggest influencers in their kids' lives. I always go back to my son and my daughter-in-law, which they have 3 teenagers. My young granddaughter is 17 years old. My grandson is 13, and never had an issue with them with drugs or even with their friends. So there's a way that we can do it, and there's a solution, and I want to be part of the solution. And also, one last thing, we're doing, matter of fact, Monday, March 31st, we're doing a Zoom prevention awareness information on Zoom. So you can go to skipbailey.com to register for that. For the parents who are listening, I'm going to put that in the chat also. Trying to get everything in at the same time. Can't hear you. Can't hear a word
you're on mute, Joanne.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say that again then. Sorry about that. Thank you, Skip, for sharing. It is so important to connect with our kids and be good listeners.
Yeah.
So, Robin, you are on mute, and I'd like to introduce Robin. And I gave some background about Robin. Robin, could you please share your perspective about being on our panel this evening, and also a reminder to the parents, if you'd like to ask any questions for any of our panelists, to please put those questions in the chat.
Yeah, well, I'm first here as a mother, a parent, that's always looking for new ways to communicate with my child and others. And then, I'm also coming from a perspective of being a child that didn't really hear much about drugs growing up. Not that it was a good or a bad, it just wasn't in my environment. And I was homeschooled my whole life until high school. And I went to high school, and it was a very big difference. It was a huge difference in environment, and I got caught up in the motions of prescription drugs and the headache that comes with active addiction. And after years of struggling with that, I finally, tapped into some resilience, which really started to help me to, I guess, want to research and go back to school and find out what was going on with the self-manipulation for years of telling myself that it was okay to be doing these drugs. And so, I really think it's for a takeaway. I don't have a huge excerpt like everyone else was so elaborate with, and the huge PowerPoint, which is amazing. But for me, I feel like the self-disclosure from parents to their children can really, bridge the gap of trust, and being able to trust your parent to tell your parent what's going on, and parents not having to shame or kind of guilt your kids into, doing what you think is the right way, and kind of just being there and guiding is a lot more powerful than we perceive, and it's definitely the little steps that get us there, versus those huge concepts that we're all running from, right? The fear of the unknown and not really knowing what's going to happen to our kids. Find the little things that go into daily tasks that can help us to feed and get the social, cultural understanding for each other. And I think we can start from there and have some good feedback from our kids. And seeing this PowerPoint, it looks like we're on the right path. He took a lot of words out of my mouth. I was like scratching things off my list of things to say, because he was telling it all. So I appreciated that, and seeing the little words that they have picked up on, to see the keywords that you hear. If you're hearing things, that's a big thing as well. Don't avoid the situation, and kind of embrace the uncomfortable feelings, because they'll definitely be beneficial in the future.
Thank you for sharing, Robin.
Sure.
Okay, I'm looking here. We have some questions. Dr. Ward, there's a question about smoking. It has been proven to cause certain issues, including lung problems, weed smoking. Would there be a difference between, smoking marijuana or cannabis and it affecting your health versus taking a pill? Would that be a safer choice?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I wrote a long answer in the chat. I apologize. This is, I think, a really fascinating question. So I'll start by just briefly saying, all of the sort of safety information, or almost all of the safety information that we have on cannabis, is from studies on chronic recreational use. And there are certainly complications that can occur with lung function with chronic cannabis use. You are smoking something. But we don't know if someone is smoking medical cannabis products with much less frequency, whether we would see those same adverse effects. And that goes for almost all of the adverse effects of cannabis. There's a lot more research that needs to be done in a medical framework so that we can get a good handle on what the adverse effects might be under different situations. And Bill touched on this too with edibles. It's a tough question, because different routes of administration have different potential problems. And so many states decide to not allow edibles in their legislation for medical cannabis because of what Bill pointed out. It takes a very long time for it to start working, and people have a very difficult time titrating how much they need. That is one of the most common ways people overdose on medical cannabis, and end up taking really uncomfortable levels and can end up in the emergency room. So it's difficult. There's pluses and minuses to the different routes of administration, and you would have to talk to your doctor and hopefully a pharmacist that is staffing the medical dispensary for advice. Right now, putting the cannabis components in a pill doesn't work well, because those kinds of chemicals don't pass through the stomach well. Lots of pharmaceutical and biotech companies are trying to figure out ways to do that, of course, but there's not a magic formulation yet. So all of the routes of administration have their weaknesses and their benefits.
Water, drink, salt, pepper. Didn't work out.
Yeah.
Oh, Zoom.
So you're on mute, Joanne.
Sorry about that, everybody. Bill, maybe you can answer this question for us. I'd like to hear from real life examples of cues we as parents should look for in our kids as a possible indication of having a drug problem. Maybe a case study. Maybe Bill or Skip or Robin possibly could answer. Maybe a couple of our panelists can take that question on.
So one of the slides noted that you're looking for changes. So one thing is changes in friendships. So if you're hanging out with healthy peers and all of a sudden the friends change. So that's one example. And then if they're not comfortable telling you who the friends are. So that is an issue. And then you're looking for attitudes or behaviors. As a child grows, you've got to trust, and there's levels of credibility. If you suspect something that's going on, well, go into the room and checking what's going out. So I was on one panel discussion where someone says, well, you should be going into your teenager's room every week and checking what's going out. I think that's a little overzealous, right? Your child deserves some privacy, but the child is keeping the door locked, right? Why is the door locked, right? There could be other issues. So, and then looking for being aware of drug paraphernalia that's out there. And I said, right, these kids are not going to be using a bong or a joint. They'll be using vaping products. Those are some of the things you could be looking for. So.
Okay.
Others can step in.
Absolutely. I agree with what Bill said in reference to as far as the friends, their whereabouts, even the fact that not your children not wanting you to know who your friends are, their real names. You know, they're going by nicknames all of this time. You know, no, what's his real name? What's her real name? You know, what's her parents? So all those little things add up. You know, so far as if I had a child. I mean, he's telling me he's hanging out with Diddy Bop guy, whoever. No, I want to know his real name. Where does he live? You know, all those things really play a major part of it. All right, screen just went. Yeah. So that was just my take on it.
Okay. Thank you, Robin. Did you have anything to add to that?
They pretty much, got everything. I personally, because it got started so early, like right in the beginning of high school, I don't remember trying. What I did to talk myself out of whatever it was to get out of the house. But I do know that I felt like I was very slick with it. I thought I was, just going in and out. But noticing, my mom was always empathetic when she was listening. She never shamed me into it. And I guess to really just, if you have those uncomfortable conversations, you don't have to look for the cues. That's so much, you can have those conversations and have that trust build. And Skip and I were talking earlier and saying, once ninth grade comes, high school, flies past. So it's so important to start early and keep it consistent, because consistency is another very important part of developing and trust.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it's really good information to share, because you come from this at a different perspective of having experienced it, being a student who was going going an addiction problem. So it's interesting to hear.
I had a soccer. It started with, soccer, had a soccer accident. Your knee, right? My knee had knee surgery. And no, my mom wasn't aware, my dad wasn't aware of what opiates would do. I wasn't even aware that, my neurological pathways were already, starting to do things that I wasn't aware of. And then, that one hit of weed later on could have been, spiraling into other things. So just knowing what your kid is taking, don't just let them go to the doctor and take whatever, because you cannot leave it up to the doctors anymore. I went to the doctor and I told him, listen, I'm in, recovery, I'm doing this. And he still, I have this, I have that. And I was like, I have, I left there crying because I was like, they're supposed to look for your best interest, but just make sure that you're there, present. And it can take us into a different, I guess, direction.
The parent has to be that advocate everywhere, every time.
Can I add something to that, Joanne?
Absolutely.
This is from us being as a father. I know some of those things that were listed. I'm going to say with a 14-year-old son, it's difficult when you have a kid that, as he's grown his hair long, his bedroom's a mess. It's hard to see the signs where he's sleeping all day long, because that's what teenagers do. They sit up in their beds all day and they sit on their phones. And so you really have to key in on some of these signs. And I will go through his stuff occasionally to see. So, I'm not doing it weekly, but I check his bags, and I talk to him about who his friends are. How come you're not talking to this guy anymore? And he'll be honest. He'll say, this kid's making some bad choices. And so I think that communication is certainly important, but I do go through his stuff and looking for those signs is not always as easy as, I'm a trained professional as a police officer to look for certain signs. But on my teenage kid, it's not easy.
Yes, it's very hard because on one hand, you don't want to invade their privacy, but then on the other hand, you're their parent. And you have to be able to know what's going on at all times.
Right.
And just protect your child.
Just one example of a good watchful eye. So, and this came from a parent at one of these presentations. So the parent opened Friday night, she hosted the party, right? And she said, well, I used to bring all the food, all the chips down all at once, and then the kids could have at it for 4 or 5 hours. And then she decided, no, she would bring the soda down and the water down. And then a little while later, the snacks would come down 20 minutes. And her daughter would say, we can't pull any nonsense because we don't know when mom is going to come down. So that's an example of a structured, supervised party where the kids have their privacy to some extent, but not completely. And it relieves the host kid from saying, mom has a watchful eye. And the more parents that agree to those behaviors. So if your kid is on the soccer team, if your kid is cheerleading, if your kid is engaged in activity, I would argue 9th grade is critical. That if you get together with a couple of other parents and say, here's the deal, like I want my kid to get through high school, I want highest SAT score, I want good grades, and I want my kid to go drug and alcohol free. If you have 5, 6, or 7 parents that agree to that, you're much more likely to have success than to let the cool kid and the cool parent take over your kid's behavior. So, and then I spoke to a high school staff, and I had the principal right in the back, and I said to the principal, I said, Mr. So-and-so, when it comes to drugs and alcohol, who's more powerful? Your tennis player who's the captain of the team or you, right? The principal, if he or she had her way, there'd be no drugs or alcohol being used by kids. But it's kids who have the negative behavior who bring other kids on. So that's what I'm saying. The kids you hang around with and starting something healthy from a 9th grade on, you're going to have much more success. Not to say will always work out, but that's another prevention strategy.
Thank you, Bill. Did you want to say something, Skip and Chief? I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So a couple quick comments to end with.
Yeah, just one more real quick comment, which is really direct, and towards the parents also, not being in denial and not being an enabler. My mother was, me and Robin were talking earlier, my mother was an enabler, not said anything bad, just that she spoiled us. And at one time when she found marijuana in my room, she asked my cousin, did she know who it was? Asked my cousin to take it back to the drug dealer and give it back to him, which my cousin gave it back to me. So don't be an enabler, and and don't be in denial.
Mhm. Thank you. Chief?
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
One more quick point about money. As parents right now, you're controlling the finances basically of your kids. A lot of these things cost a lot of money, the vapes and alcohol, kind of be weary of, all right, I give my son $10 because he's going to the mall with this, or they don't even go to the mall anymore, because he's going to the store to get something to eat, or 10, $20, ask for a change. And if he's not giving you change, well, what'd you spend the money on? Where'd all that money go? So those things cost a lot of money, the drugs and things like that. Be mindful of how much you're doling out to your kid. Where's that money going? I think that those are appropriate questions to ask your, 12 to 15-year-old son or 17-year-old kid. So be mindful of that.
Thank you. And then just one last question. Chief, is there a drug of choice among our youth that you've noticed in our area?
I think Bill provided a nice slide with the marijuana, the vaping, the alcohol. All those are certainly prevalent, easily accessible, modeled by the parents. If the parents are out doing it, you as a parent at home, you're the model of what they see. So, if you're out drinking and whooping it up, then the kids see that too. They do what you do. So, and it's easily accessible if it's in the house. So yes, all those drugs.
Well, I'd like to thank all our panelists for coming out tonight and contributing to a wonderful, really down-to-earth conversation with parents about how to handle these issues. Thank you, Bill, from the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey, Dr. Ward, Chief Owens, Skip, and Bailey, and Robin Skeet. It was great having you all here. Hope that we can continue this conversation in the future. If anybody wants to reach out to any of our panelists, feel free to do so. If anybody would like to send me any messages, any feedback, my email is on the Cranberry Township website under the Municipal Alliance. This is a big objective of the Municipal Alliance, to get information out there to our students, to our parents, and our community. And I feel that this week during Drug and Alcohol Facts Week, we really did get a lot of good information out there for our children, our most vulnerable, and for our parents and our community. So thank you to our special guests, and thank you for all the other members of the Municipal Alliance who were here tonight, Dr. Jenko, Christine Fulton, and Krista Santoro. I hope I didn't miss anybody else. Mr. Wright. So we really appreciate you all being here, and thank you for everyone for attending our program this evening. We hope that it was valuable for you. So have a good night, everybody.